The views and opinions of the guests on the Wylena Show are those of the guests and are not necessarily the views and opinions of the hostess Wylena and or her co-host. She knows that you love God will make you grow. I want to find out what you need to know. What it is to go now. Whether the world is the road. I'm not
Well, I tell you what. Yeah, it says from Las Vegas. But today that's not the case. You know, the Wylena Show is in a different location today, as you can clearly see by the set, okay, that the show is in a different location. And so, just for today, you guys. But listen, I'm excited that you came back. I am so happy that you came back to view the Wylena Show once again. Thank you, everybody who is watching out there on WylenaTVShow.com and everybody who is watching out there on YouTube and Google Hangout and everybody who's watching in Pakistan and listening on Spreaker and all over the whole wide world. You are the bomb. I'm excited that you are back, and I have my two guests back with me, and this is part 2, and it is the final cut. Okay, part 2 of does Mormons create atheists, or is this just a case of disgruntled met? Well, anyway, we're going to find out right here on the Wylena Show. And y'all know the road, we got to meet the road on the Wylena Show. We had a great show last week, and the phones were blowing up, and people were calling in with all their comments and questions and all of that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and so I tell you what, we're looking forward to another show today, and this is it. We're not going to have any commercials today because I want to get right down to the nitty-gritty where the rubber meets the road. And y'all know who I am. I'm Wylena, the Las Vegas Queen of Gospel, and I'm excited to have you back. And I have to welcome back my two guests. I have with me Joe Rawlings, who was formerly Mormon and is currently atheist. Okay? Yeah. And I also have with me, back with me, Daniel Johnson, who is currently Mormon. Okay? Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm going to be talking to these guys here, and in actuality, everybody, what we didn't cover last week is what we're going to cover today, okay? These guys have some questions for each other. So you know me. Y'all know how Wylena roll. I can't let them talk to each other because we just don't do that on the Wylena Show. But I've got the questions, and I'm going to ask each guy the question for the other guy. All right? I make a good mediator in case if y'all don't know it, you know. So anyway, I want to first welcome back to the show Daniel Johnson. Daniel, how are you? Are you with me, Daniel?
I am. I've had kind of a crazy day running around, but I'm here and happy to be with you.
Wonderful, Daniel. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me once again. And I just want everybody to know, yes, I am in a different location today, and I think my internet is a little sketchy and maybe a little itchy and gritchy and glitchy and all that kind of good stuff. But it is what it is. But you know how it is. The Wylena Show must go on. The rubber has to meet the road. I told y'all before, you know, sometimes I have some health issues and sometimes I'm really not feeling that great. So you might see the Wylena Show being filmed from a hospital bed. You never know. The rubber gotta meet the road, no matter what it takes to make it happen. I gotta make it happen, okay? You know, that's just, if I'm breathing, we gonna do the Wylena show, okay? If I gotta have somebody bring the cameras into my, room and sit up in the bed and do the show, it is what it is, because that's how I roll, y'all. Okay, so look, I want to welcome back to the show Joe Rawlings, the atheist guy. Joe, are you with me?
I am, and not currently disgruntled. I'm grateful that you have me back on the show, and that Daniel's back on the show, and we had a good discussion last time, and I look forward to it.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Joe. Looks like I'm having some, I don't know, looks like I'm having a lot of technical difficulties here. But either way, thank you so much, Joe, for coming back, and Daniel for coming back with us. I really do greatly appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching and tuning in out there, please excuse the technical difficulties, because it does appear that I'm having some. It does appear that I'm having a few technical difficulties here on this end. But anyway, it is what it is, and we're going to roll on. We're going to roll on. The show must go on, everyone. It must go on. Okay. To call while the show is going on, you can call 1-866-945-1110. That's 1-866-945-1110. You can also call 702-527-4471. That's 702-527-4471. And if you call the number and you get a busy signal or you can't get through, just hang up, listen to the show, call back, and try again, okay? And always remember, when you call into the Wylena show, you got to call in here and talk to my guests with respect, because that's just the way I do things here on the Wylena show. We cannot have no tripping and potato chipping over here. If you call in here acting ugly, we're going to introduce you to what I call a brand new click, and that's hang up the phone on you, okay? And so for the most part, you have the right to agree to disagree on the Wylena show. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. You can call in and say, hey, I think you're wrong about that. I disagree with you fervently. Prove what you're saying to be true. Okay? And that's your prerogative, because everybody is entitled to their own belief and their own prerogative and their own teaching and whatever. Alrighty, so look at here. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty, and we're going to start. These guys have have presented some questions, okay? And I tell you, the guys, per their requests, they especially our atheist guy now, especially our atheist guy, especially him. Okay, he wanted to ask a few questions of the Mormon faith. And so I found someone that was willing to answer the questions as much as he possibly can, to the best of his ability. All right. Now, Daniel Johnson does not speak for the entire denominational belief, but he is going to answer these questions on his own terms and to the best of his ability. And so we commend him for being willing to step up to the plate and take a licking on the Wylena show. Take a licking. And so Daniel, he's agreed. And so to our viewers and our listeners, so that you will know, you have both, these guys have both presented the questions, okay? And I'll begin the process on questioning. And so as I ask the questions, please be succinct, guys, okay, if you will, as much as possible, so that we can take the time, have the time, for all the questions as much as possible. And, since we've already missed you know, asking some of the questions on part 1 because we had some heated callers last week. Woo! Boy, I tell you, that was a rubber meet the road show last week. And so, but anyway, I'll give you the opportunity for a rebuttal if we have the time, okay? So if I ask you a question and then the other one you want to come back and make another statement about that, there's no problem in that area, okay? But also, you are only allowed, guys, to talk to me. Okay, you are not allowed to talk to the other. Speak to me. I'll ask you a question and you answer it, and you're talking directly to me. Okay, you will wait until it's your turn. You will also wait until it's your turn to speak. Do not speak out of turn. Just simply take notes and stay, you know, prepared to respond when I call on you. And once I call on you, please don't answer directly, immediately. Give pause about a second and then begin your answer, because that gives the camera time to switch and all that. Okay, so do we agree with the terms of this questionnaire, guys? Yes?
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, so the questions will begin. I'm going to start with questions for Joe from Daniel. Okay? Okay. All right, so Joe, Daniel wants to know, did you feel any kind of personal loss upon figuring out that there was no God?
That is a great question, Miss Weiliner, and I'm happy to answer it. Can you? Oh yeah, I can. I had to make sure my microphone is on. Yeah, I did actually. It wasn't what I expected. I expected some kind of misfortune in my life and darkness overall in my life. But the loss of what gives you purpose, of course, it will feel like a loss. And in the Korahor argument, my book, I talk about it as a grieving process, that I had to grieve my God. And, you know, this was my greatest confidant. This was my truest friend and the person I believed who gave me the greatest sense of purpose and purpose to my struggles in life. But what I gained out of it and what I was really seeking was integrity, of saying, I'm not going to pretend to believe in God. I'm not going to pretend to know that God exists. I'm going to admit to what I do know, and I'm going to pursue the truth wherever it leads me. At the time, I was confident that it would lead me back to the church and that it would lead me back to God, but I had to know, I wouldn't ever know for certain that that was genuine unless I truly pursued a way out of faith and into knowledge and an epistemology that made more sense to me. And I've still been looking for that integrity to this day, and I can say that well over 10 years later, atheism serves me better in my integrity than faith ever did.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much. Listen, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask 2 questions, okay? And then I'll go to the other guy like that, so we can kind of breeze through these if it's at all possible. All right? Okay. So, Joe, question number 2 from Daniel for you. And Daniel, you're getting your answers as we go along, okay, and vice versa. All right, so Joe, question number 2 for you from Daniel. Okay, what is your view of people who understand the difficulties in LDS history and still believe in the church, Joe?
That's a great question. I actually know quite a few people like that. We've been discussing that actually here on the Weiliner Show, going back into our discussions with Kay Scott, that what I really learned leaving Mormonism and leaving religion is that it really isn't so much about the origin story for a lot of believers. A lot of Mormons I know are aware that there are problems, don't want to know what they are, or maybe are aware what some of them are. But for them, they have their own personal Jesus, you know, they have their own religion, they have their own faith, and it doesn't necessarily involve that Joseph Smith, as a 14-year-old boy, saw God and Jesus Christ in a grove of trees. It doesn't necessarily mean that there has to have been a translation of the Book of Mormon as a historical document. So my feelings on that are mixed between compassion and empathy for some people who are just trying to make their faith work with what they've got, with what Joseph Smith and the church have left them, and people who obviously are practicing cognitive dissonance. There are some people who will never really embrace that Joseph Smith did bad things, but instead will choose by faith to say, well, Joseph Smith did them, then it's not bad, you know, kind of the Nixon, if the president does it, it's not illegal. So I mean, I see it kind of both ways in that regard. But definitely Mormons have my compassion for those who are aware of the problems and are trying to work out their salvation in spite of them.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Joe. Thank you for that. Okay, so listen, Daniel, I would like to know if you would like to make a rebuttal. Okay, I'm going to give you the opportunity to address his two answers that he just gave you, and then we'll move on to the questions that he has for you. All right, so Daniel, there you are on.
All right, I don't know if there's any need for a rebuttal. I mean, basically those were just, I had a tough time coming up with a list of questions, especially 10. But I just was kind of curious to see his personal reflections on them and how he would answer them. And I mean, his experiences and his opinions are his own, so I'm not sure how I can, you know, counter that. But I thank him for sharing his views.
Okay, all right, so here we go. Okay, so Daniel, the ball is going to be in your court. Now, Joe has some things he wants to know from you too, so let's see what he wants to know. Okay, question number 1 for you, Daniel, from Joe. What does it mean to say that the church is true? Can the church's claims about its origin be false and misleading, but the central message of the church simultaneously true?
That's a tough one. I know that our leaders have kind of said that both of those have to be the case. That you know, the claims that we cling to as a matter of faith must be true, or else the church is not. They've kind of made a very sort of polarizing statement. Say it's either, it's an either-or proposition, and I think that regardless of that, there's a lot of good and truth here, regardless of what the origins are. I think probably the main issues with our origins are things that we can't know for sure. You know, I can't know for sure that Joseph Smith was called of God and he spoke with God and was called to be a prophet. That's something I can believe and have faith in. And I'm not sure something like that is falsifiable, as I've discussed that with others. But I would think, you know, for me personally, I would think that our origin, the key points of our origin, maybe not all of our traditions, but the important points really should be true in order for us to have the claim of being a true church.
Okay. So Joe, you don't know, it's not your turn yet, Joe, to rebuttal. Okay. So just hang on, Joe. I'm going to ask question number 2, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity, Joe, to rebuttal in relation to Daniel's answer. So question number 2, Daniel, from Joe, is critics and Mormons accuse one another of confirmation bias, or only looking for the answers that they want to see. How do you propose to find out who is seeing the truth and who is just looking for excuses.
That's that's a tough one. I'm not sure that someone like me can really provide an answer there, but I think that for us, the truth of God or anything from a religious point of view kind of has to come from within. There is an element of faith that can't be proven to someone else. But when it comes to trying to take claims and counterclaims and defenses and arguments back and forth, I think you can perhaps look at the attitude and the motivation of those doing it. From what I've seen with many anti-Mormons, there's nothing true about the teachings of the church. There's nothing good about the history. There's nothing substantive in the Book of Mormon. They won't even give in 1 inch. And so I think anyone that takes that view of it's all bad and you can't find anything to it, I think you would have to suspect their motives and suspect how they're reviewing their answers. Consequently, anyone that says that everything is 100% correct and perfect and there's no problem, I think you'd have to suspect that as well. And so perhaps, much to our chagrin, I think that church historians and leaders and members are recognizing that there is some good with the bad, and they're kind of agreeing with the critics to some degree, because with any type of human endeavor, there are going to be problems. But I think it's you know, how extreme are the views being presented? That's what I would look for.
Okay. Okay. All right. So look here. We're going to go back over here. And I want to just see, because, you know, Joe, he really loves to talk. I tell you, Joe really, I got a feeling Joe has something to say. You know, but anyway, now he'll fool me if he don't, okay? But I'm going to give Joe the floor. I'm going to see, Joe, would you like to make a rebuttal in relation to the 2 answers that Daniel gave for your 2 questions?
I would. Succinctly as possible, whenever I have this discussion between critic and Mormon, very rarely do I have only a faithful response from the Mormon or any other believer, frankly, but usually there is an element of critical thinking. Now, when we say critical thinking, so that we're clear, I'm not saying people who don't use critical thinking don't use thinking. Everybody uses thinking for the most part. A few Trump supporters, you know, accepted. But otherwise, pretty much everybody uses some form of thinking. But critical thinking, principles of critical thinking are, you know, talking about that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that things that require more presumption, that's Occam's razor says, things that require more presumptions to be true are less likely, that things need to be falsifiable, like Daniel was saying earlier, or duplicatable in a different laboratory. These are principles by which we start to ask questions like, what is that person's motive? And I will happily concede that there are a lot of anti-Mormons who are more interested in proving Mormonism false than they are in suggesting that there's something else, something better out there. I'm not one of them, but I know a lot of them, and that's too bad that it has to be so antagonistic. But the crux of my argument has been, and the Korihor argument, the book that I wrote, in Alma chapter 32, which is where we get, you know, we start to divide up good principles and bad principles. In the Book of Mormon, there's a chapter where the prophet Alma teaches that you have to prepare ground in your heart to receive a portion of his words as a seed, and that if you believe in just a portion, if you take just one part of it and say, yeah, that sounds good to me, then you take the rest on faith and say, okay, I don't know about all the rest of this, but this one part seems good to me, and you let that flourish, and you let that grow. And then over time, you just know that it's true because you started from belief without evidence. And that's where I draw the line and say, okay, this is where we're starting to suspend critical thinking with faith. And that's the problem, and the reason why in my book I talk about faith being dangerous.
Okay. Okay, so, Joe, I knew you would have something to say. maybe you just didn't want to disappoint me. Okay. So anyway, now listen, Joe. Daniel has more questions for you, and of course you have more questions for Daniel. So let's move forward. Okay. So I have another question. I'm going to do 2 more questions for you. Okay. So question number 3 from Daniel to you, Joe. Is there, in your view, any possibility of an afterlife?
Yeah, absolutely there's a possibility of an afterlife, just as there's a possibility of God. There are, I mean, to say that it is impossible that these things are true, like Daniel was saying, you know, you get to 100% yes or 100% no on anything as far as the possibility is concerned. And we start to question, is this a person who's really wanting to know the truth, or is this a person who has an ulterior motive in saying, no, it's not possible that there's an afterlife? And so I would say it's possible, but we don't have any solid, duplicatable, falsifiable evidence that can be, you know, that can be sifted out by critical thinking to say that this is definitely something that exists and that it's something that mankind's religions can sort out who ends up where, and you know what you eat or how you dress or how you behave is going to affect the outcome of the afterlife. I would say, you know, if we're putting it down to like we were talking about last time with Pascal's wager, it's weighted very heavily on no. So as Richard Dawkins would say, if it's 1 to 7, 1 being yes, I know there's a God, you can't change my mind, or 7, no, I know there's no God, and you can't possibly change my mind, me and Richard Dawkins, we're 6. You know, we're pretty well convinced that's not the case, no afterlife, no God, but we could be convinced. Where's the evidence?
Okay. All right. Daniel, you have your answer. But before we move forward, we have a caller on the line. And so let's see what the caller wants to know. Hello, caller. How are you?
Hello, how's it going?
It's going fine. Thank you very much. And state your name and where you're calling from, please.
This is Marcelo calling from Houston, Texas.
All righty, Mr. Marcello from Houston, Texas. Thanks for calling and thank you for tuning in to the Wylena Show. You have a question or a comment? What's your...
Yes, I have a question.
Go right ahead.
I was wanting to ask, I think the atheist guy's name is Joe?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I was wanting to know if there is no God, then why are there humans? And if humans came from apes, then why have they stopped evolving?
Oh boy, I tell you, I have to crack up sometime on my own show. Okay, that's the caller's question. But anyway, caller, are you able to hear the answer, or do you need to hang up and take your answer off the air?
I think I need to hang up.
Okay, feel free to call back if you like. Thanks for tuning in to the Wylena Show. And I'm going to pass that. Wait about a second, and then you'll hear Joe's answers. Okay? All right, take care. Okay. Joe! Somebody wanted a cup of Joe today. All right, so Joe, go for it.
Oh, man, I got to tell you, Miss Wylena, my favorite questions from callers are callers who are looking for a cup of Joe. That is my favorite. That's a great question. I actually dedicate the better part of 1 chapter of my book on this subject about evolution and how we find out about details of the past, okay? In revealed religions that have an origin story, particularly Christianity with the Bible in Genesis, you start from in the beginning. God created the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and start from the antiquity and move forward. Okay? But and so we presume it's a position of bias, and like I say before, we all have our bias. We all have our position from which we see the world. And if you start from the position that we have to take this stake in the ground in the past and say, this is how the good book says it started, therefore that's how it started, and we need to work our way forward. Instead, the more practical way to use critical thinking is to say, this is where I stake in the ground now. We see what's around us now and work our way into the past. And so, but if you're a religious person who starts from in the beginning and works your way forward, you presume that the atheist must also start from the past and then work their way forward to the present day. But that, from the perspective of not just atheists, but critical thinkers, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes more sense to say, what do we know about the world, and what did the people who wrote the Bible not know about the world, not know about the origins of the universe, not know about how the very Earth revolves on its axis and how it moves in the solar system. I mean, we have to take into account that these stories were probably allegorical from the beginning. And so as far as how evolution works and why don't the apes continue to evolve, the apes do continue to evolve. And we as apes, particularly of the great African ape family, continue to evolve also. Just in human history, from the time that the Bible's events were recorded until now, human beings have evolved, you know, from Homo sapiens into Homo sapiens sapiens, or in other words, modern man. That's what we know by the science, by looking at the evidence that's there. We agree and concede freely. We don't know the whole story from the beginning of all the cosmos. We're still putting it together, but at least we're doing it the right way by taking what is evident and not by staking a claim in the past that was, you know, laid out by a bunch of goat herds and shepherds in ancient Palestine and then say, well, they obviously had it right, so let's make it work as best we can from there.
Okay, Joe. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be asking my own questions today. This is supposed to be about you and Daniel and you guys' questions for each other. But I tell you, sometimes I have a little bit of a problem controlling myself and keeping myself disciplined the way that I should. You know what I mean? And so sometimes I get a little out of hand. And right now, I just want to add a question to the list. Did I hear you say that that apes are still evolving? Because now, I mean, I think what the caller is trying to find out is about people evolving from apes. And personally, I mean, I've seen apes, I've seen monkeys, I've seen them, and the ones I've seen, they just stay monkeys and they stay apes. They don't grow into becoming men and women or whatever. So you got to talk to me just a little bit more, Joe, and give me a little bit more. What did you mean when you say apes are still evolving? Are you trying to tell me that there's some apes somewhere on this planet that are actually turning into people? Hello! Talk to me on the Wild in the Show. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Right. There's some confusion there. Let me put it in a different term that helps us to understand this. When I was in college, my first course in college was anthropology. And in there we learned about a period of time when anthropologists were left behind, stuck in the past with this idea of what they called the layer cake theory. The idea that pygmies are not Englishmen because they haven't become civilized enough. Obviously, if pygmies were more civilized, they'd be Englishmen. But it took time for the anthropologists to come to an understanding that pygmies our culture are modernizing. They're modernizing into more modern pygmies, just as Englishmen had a ways to go. You know, it's easy for us to, as Americans, to say, well, if Englishmen were more evolved, they would be Americans, obviously. But the reality is that Englishmen are becoming better Englishmen, and Americans are becoming better Americans. Hopefully, well, sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. But similarly, we share common ancestors with bonobos and chimpanzees. We share common ancestors, even going far enough backwards into Asian apes like the orangutan. I mean, it's all part of this family that is branching out, just as your family tree hopefully branches out. There are some parts of Utah, we won't even go into that, but hopefully family trees branch out. Well, similarly, the tree of family life, the family tree of human life and animal life on this planet is branching out. So we didn't evolve from apes. We are apes. We're great apes of the African apes family, like bonobos and chimpanzees, somewhat distantly, quite distantly related to orangutans, and even further distantly related to, say, dolphins or so forth. We don't know all the links of how that works out, but all the evidence consistently shows that that evolution is taking place and that it's never stopped.
I tell you what, Joe. I can't carry this on. I can't carry this on. But man, let me get you straight on something. I am not no doggone ape, okay? I am not no monkey. I'm not no ape. As a matter of fact, I'm too darn cute to be one. Okay? Now I don't think none of my ancestors is ape. Now you might be right, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I beg to differ. I'm sitting here, I want to crack up so bad, and so why not? I might as well just bust a move. It's my show anyway. I'm telling you now, Joe, I am not related to the apes, okay? Planet of the Apes is not where I'm from. All right, so listen. Joe, I mean, not Joe, but Daniel, Daniel, I hope you are taking some notes or something, because I know we're getting far away from your answers to your questions. But you know, what can I tell you? This is something, you know, stomach here. I mean, I got a guest on my show telling me that we did come from apes, and I'm trying to make some sense out of it. I just don't see it when I look in the mirror. Anyway, let's move on. Boy, I tell you, I kill my own self when I do my show. Every single week, y'all. It just never changes. All right, so listen, Joe, the second question for you, Joe, is, would you want your children to be in the church or out of the church? And we did have a caller that was calling through, and we missed the call. So caller, whoever you are, you can try calling back. We'll catch your call the next time around. Okay, so try calling back. All right, so the question was, would you want your children to be in the church or out of the church? Joe, from Daniel.
Oh man, now that is the rubber meeting the road here at the Rollins household. I am not a Mormon anymore. I was excommunicated in 2013. I had not practiced Mormonism in 10 years at that point. But during the course of that time, I met a beautiful Mormon who I married. We've been married now for 11 years. We're very happy, and we have 3 little kids. And sometimes they go to church with their mom. The agreement that we came to between my wife and I is that nobody should feel like they are required to go to church, and that they wouldn't be baptized when they're 8 years old. Apart from that, I came to the conclusion that God didn't exist when I was a grown man and when I could make that decision for myself. And I want to preserve that for my children. So I want them to be what they want to be. If they want to be Mormons, the most important thing I want them to know is that I love them, and that there's nothing that they can do that stops that and makes me feel less of them. So, I mean, if you're asking me what I would prefer, in my heart of hearts, of course I would prefer that they weren't Mormons. But more importantly, I would hope that my children, that I had raised them to come to their own conclusions and to think these things through for themselves and to come to that conclusion for themselves. If my children chose not to be Mormons simply because I expected them not to be, I don't think I'd be able to forgive myself. So.
Okay. Okay, Joe. Now you are saying Mormon, but now I read the question. Okay, the question didn't say Mormon. It really didn't say Mormon. Now I don't know. Daniel can clarify if that's what he really meant. But the question said, would you want your children to be in the church or out of the church? So I guess it would take Daniel to clarify that, but you're saying Mormon, and that's not what the question was. I'd like to give you the opportunity to revisit that question just in case, and then when Daniel comes back, and of course we have a caller on the line, but when Daniel comes back, he can clarify whether he meant Mormon or just simply church. Okay, so Joe, do you want to revisit that question?
I would be happy to. When Christians say in the church, usually they mean in the biblical New Testament sense, in the church meaning the body of Christ, generally speaking, believers in Christ. When LDS people, and Daniel can correct me if this is not what he meant, but when LDS people say in the church or not in the church, they usually generally mean members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons. Now, there are other kinds of Mormons, but when LDS Mormons say Mormon, they mean LDS. Usually, generally speaking, when I grew up in Mormonism, there were two distinctions for people in the world: members and non-members. So that was the 7 million at that time, now 14 million some odd people in the world versus everyone else. So I presumed, if I presumed too much, Daniel, I apologize.
Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you for clarifying that. And we're going to just check with Daniel in just a moment. But listen, we have a caller on the line. Hello, caller. How are you?
This is Marcello again from Eastern Texas.
Okay. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I was wanting to, because I hear he talks about the book of Genesis. And I know there's a scripture that says God created man out of, and made him in the image of God. So I know they say that humans were first apes and they evolved into man. So would he say that God looks like an ape? If man was created in God's image? And the first question was, if there is no God, then why are there man, or why are there humans?
Okay. Okay. Boy, I tell you, this caller right here is really killing me. I'm really having a time dealing with these questions today. Did you hear the question, Joe?
I did indeed. And it's back to the same question, honestly, to tie it in with the Mormon thing, right? Back after Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the first presidency, issued an official statement, one of the first of the controversial modern Mormon statements, called The Origins of Man, if I'm not mistaken, in which they said, look, basically to sum it up, they said, let's get this straight, okay? The first man was Adam, his wife was Eve, and those are the origins of man. And over time, there's been more genetic research and more things that have lined up with the argument that human beings are not evolved from apes. We are apes. Apes that are highly evolved, but in the same way that viruses are highly evolved, snakes are highly evolved because they're extant. They continue today. We are not evolved from apes. We are apes. I have 3 beautiful little children. They're the most adorable little primates you can find anywhere. It's been a central tenet that this idea of in Christianity that we have to modernize the creation story that more and more Christians, I find, are departing from that tradition, from that idea, and deciding that we really need to understand Genesis as something allegorical to stay in tune with scientific discoveries of the current era. DNA testing, genetics, family history, medicine, genetic medicine, cancer research in medicine, overcoming hereditary disease, all of these things depend on that the story of genetics is true. And if that is true, then evolution is accurate, and we are not evolved from apes. And the idea that we are created in the image of God has to have some other explanation. Now, maybe I'll throw it out there. Maybe there's some other explanations that I hear from Mormons who have come around on the idea, in spite of the Origins of Man essay, have come around to the idea that we did evolve, and said, well, maybe at some point there was an ape highly evolved enough that he had intelligence. The breath of life that God breathes into Adam is intelligence and the ability to examine his own nature, what we traditionally see as the difference between men and animals. Now, of course, we're now seeing that that is not so distinct, that the highly evolved apes in our cousins in the primate family are very much aware in many ways the same way that we are, not quite as developed cerebrally. But I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent there. But if God is created in our image, then does he look like an ape? I'd say he must have to look like an amoeba or some kind of bacteria or something else entirely, because this story goes way back before there were apes, so before there were even mammals. So who knows?
Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? Wow. All I'm gonna say is the rhythm is the roll on the Wally the show today, because I can really run with this thing right here. But Daniel, how you doing over there? You got something to say, Daniel, before I go on to the next question?
I think I have a lot to say. So I appreciate being able to say it. I think that Joe answered, seems like he was asked the same question twice there by your caller. So he did a fine job in answering it. And I think when it comes to a believing point of view versus an atheist point of view, we're just going to have these differences. The problem is when the person asks the atheist why. I think that coming from a purely empirical and scientific point of view, that's good at telling us things like what and how. And I think the purpose of religion, or perhaps philosophy, is to try and teach us why, or maybe who. And I think the problem is when science and religion overstep their bounds and try to answer each other's questions. I think that's kind of a problem. And I can say that for myself, I have no problem with evolution. I have no problem with what the scientists tell us. I have no problem with the age of the earth. And I think many Mormons would fit into that category. We're actually, I think, okay looking at the Old Testament as being symbolic. There are many things there that are symbolic. There are certain things definitely we don't take as literal. We don't take literal that Eve was created from Adam's rib. We think that's symbolism and has meaning. We don't take it as literal that Adam was created from the dust of the earth. We take that as symbolism. And so for us, our teachings and our scriptures tell us more about the spiritual origin of man than the physical origin of man. That's kind of left mysterious. That's left for the scientists to figure out on their own. And I don't think that God's really told us our origins in that sense. So for us, our teachings would stress more our spiritual creation, our spiritual connection to God, and then leave us to our own devices to try and figure out the actual development and evolution and source of the physical world. But we would believe that no matter what method, that God was at the helm, if you will, that it was all done for a purpose, but he hasn't really told us his methods. So that's my take on it, as best I can do at the moment.
Okay, all righty. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Daniel. Thank you very much. Okay, so listen, we got more questions here, and I can clearly see, guys, we're not going to cover all these questions that you both presented to each other. So this will have to be carried on a different show at a different time in a different place. All right. So we're going to do the best we can here. So Daniel, Joe wants to know, who is Elder Holland? And what role or does he play in the LDS Church, if any? What mistakes were made by Joseph Smith that Elder Holland claims only prove that Smith was an ordinary sinner like the rest of us? Did you understand the question, Daniel?
I understand. I understand the questions. I think it's asking for some specific stuff that I don't know. I can tell you that I'm thinking he's referring to Elder Jeffrey Holland, who is a member of our Quorum of 12 Apostles, and so he would be looked upon as being a prophet, seer, and revelator, as being able to say some fairly definitive things. What mistakes of Joseph Smith he's referring to specifically, I don't have that in front of me, but I mean. I think, we've always held to the position that he was a sinner and a fallen human being like the rest of us. As far as which things he did were mistakes and which things weren't, some of that there might not be universal agreement upon. But yeah, for us, he was a fallen person who made mistakes and had his shortcomings like all of us. We just believe that in spite of that, he was called to be a prophet of God, to do a great work. Many of the prophets in the Old Testament, their stories are full of their mistakes and their shortcomings as well. And so we would say, well, that's okay. God can do His work through imperfect men. But what specific things he's saying that Elder Holland has said, I wouldn't know at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Daniel. So the next question, Daniel, for you is, if the church were to admit that the Book of Mormon does not document real-life historical events, how would it change your understanding of the church's claim to be God's only true church, Daniel?
I'm not sure how the two are directly related. I think that if such an admission were made, that would be a major blow. And it would sort of undermine all the things that we've said and supported, since the days of Joseph Smith. It would certainly, undermine the things that he said. I believe in the historical nature of the Book of Mormon, but I don't believe that's its most important aspect. And I would go along with a friend of mine who is in our church, and he's kind of coming to his own conclusions that things aren't true. He's sort of a mathematician by trade, and he sort of weighs evidence. And he says there's evidence for it being true, and there's evidence against it being true. And so he's just kind of going with the preponderance of evidence, so to speak. But for him, I think faith is a difficult issue, and for us, faith is an important issue there. So I think that there could still be, for me, there's beauty and truth in the Book of Mormon, no matter what its origin is, and I find it to be extremely applicable to today. But I still think that, I'm going to stand by its historical narrative, and I don't think the church will ever make such a statement, simply because of what I've said. But if it did, that certainly would be a major blow.
Okay. Thank you for that, Daniel. Okay, I know Joe. Joe is over there inching in his seat. Boy, he inching in his seat. He got ants in the pants right now. Okay, but you know what? Joe, you know what? I know you want a rebuttal, man. But look, we only got 4 minutes left, and we got a couple more. We got quite a few more questions. But I want to ask you this question. Joe, I want to ask you this question. So what's going to happen is I'm going to ask you this question, and then once I give you the floor, you can go ahead and add to whatever you wanted to add to in relation to what Daniel just said, because I know you do. All right, so listen. I want to know, and also Daniel wants to know too. My first question for you, and I want you to just give me a simple yes or no. The excommunication that you received from the LDS church, that excommunication was done in a closed quarters, in a hearing type office. Isn't that correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now, with your answer being yes, I listened to that excommunication recording as well, and I heard the guy on the recording say, everything that's in this room stays in this room. Do you agree? And I heard you say, yes, I agree. All right, now you correct me if you didn't say that. You correct me, all right? But I thought sure I heard you say yes. All right, so my question to you and Daniel's question to you as well is, why did you record the excommunication hearing?
That is a great question. I don't recall having agreed to it staying in the room. That may be. If I said that in that room on that day, I'm just going to come out and say I lied. I don't recall having said that, but boy, I hope I didn't, because that wasn't truthful. I fully intended to publish the recording. The main reason why I wanted that recording is that I wanted other people to know that it was okay to stand up, that you didn't have to take it lying down, you didn't have to sneak away quietly into the night. You can face the LDS Church directly, you can tell them the reasons why, and the more that you do that, the more of that conversation is going to arise, and they have a chance to improve upon the church, if they will improve upon the church, which I don't think that they will. But we need to give them every possible opportunity to see we are not all leaving because we like, dirty, kinky sex, or that we like, drinking too much, or we like smoking too much. Some of us are leaving because this church teaches bad things that we cannot abide. And so I wanted people to see and feel inspired that you have the right to do that, and you should feel empowered to do that.
Well. I'll tell you what, the time is up, y'all. The time is up. But listen, this is what I'm going to do, because this is my show and I can do what I want on my show. So I want to give you guys 1 minute each, okay? Just 1 simple minute each to give us a closing thought. So Joe, I'm going to come back to you. I want your closing thought, and Daniel, you will have 1 minute after Joe to do a closing thought, and then that's it. We're out of here, guys. Time's up for the Wylena Show. Okay, so Joe, go for it. Your closing thought, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ms. Wylena, for having had me on these 5 shows now. It's been a great experience. Thank you to all your callers for your tremendous questions and calls. I hope that I informed a lot more than offend. If I offended, I do apologize. My goal is not to hurt people's feelings. My goal is for us to have a dialogue to better understand one another, and I feel like it's been very productive. To Daniel, I want to thank you very much for being willing to come on with me, and for being so cordial, and for giving honest and blunt answers. I got a lot out of them, and I'll tell you, I respect you a lot more for it. And to all the viewers of the Wylena Show, thank you very much for having had me on. It's been a blast.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Joe, and you are so welcome. Daniel, you have your 1 minute for a closing thought, please.
All right, thank you. I'd certainly like to appreciate you for setting this up, Ms. Whiteliner, and especially to Joe for, I'm sure being willing to come on is easy for him, but I think especially for his attitude and for his honesty, I appreciate that, and for his desire not to offend. I've been offended before, certainly not by Joe. I think he does a great job, and I appreciate his candor and his honesty. So it's been a nice opportunity to dialogue with someone that holds an opposing view, and yet do it in such a way which I think is respectful and also helpful all around. So I do appreciate that. From my point of view, there are a lot of people that will say a lot of negative things about us, and they have their point of view. We're going to try and defend ourselves, and hopefully we do a decent job of it. I can say that in regards to some complaints I've heard, not from Joe, I don't feel that I've ever been lied to in the church. I don't feel that I've ever come across any bad teachings. I do think that there have been certain things in our human past that we don't like to stress, but we're being more honest about it now, and that's probably a good thing. So I would say to everyone, look at the intentions of the people who are arguing for or against. Weigh it out in your minds. Check the pro arguments, check the con arguments, see how the church responds to some of these arguments. I think you'll find some good information.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, listen. I'm excited, and I'm always excited, and y'all know I'm always excited. Okay, and so thank you very much to Joe Rawlings and Daniel Johnson for being great guests. Thank you both for coming back on the Wallina Show, and I appreciate you guys. Listen, everybody, I tell you the same thing all the time, and you know what that is. Study for yourself. You have got to study for yourself. There are so many different teachings and beliefs out there, you will be confused. So you have got to study for yourself. Get in the books, get on the internet, get in the Bible, do what you got to do. Get in the encyclopedia, go to the library, do what you got to do, but study for yourself, okay? You owe it to you to study for yourself. Don't wait for the person up front to tell you everything you think you need to know. Do it for yourself. Okay, y'all know who I am. I'm Wildlina, the Las Vegas Queen of Gospel, and y'all know what show this is. This is the Wildlina Show, and this is where the rubber meets the road. We'll see you next week.